The truth is, I never saw myself as the kind of person who would do something like this. If you had asked me a year ago, I would have looked you straight in the eye and told you with absolute certainty that I was a loyal woman, a good wife. My life was built on a foundation of routine and respectability. David and I had been married for 20 years, and in that time, we had built a life that, from the outside, looked perfectly put together. We had a lovely home in a quiet neighborhood, a daughter we were both incredibly proud of who was about to start her freshman year of college, and a shared history that felt as comfortable and worn in as my favorite sweater. David was a good man, a stable man. He was an engineer, precise and thoughtful in everything he did. He never forgot to take the trash out on Tuesday nights. He always remembered to fill my car with gas if he knew I had a long drive the next day. And he never, ever raised his voice. For a long time, I mistook that quiet consistency for deep, abiding love. I think that was my first mistake. The change didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, creeping realization that settled in my bones, especially in the evenings, after we'd finished dinner and would sit in opposite chairs. Him scrolling through news on his tablet, me flipping through a book I wasn't really reading. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt heavy, full of things we weren't saying. Our daughter Chloe's imminent departure for college seemed to highlight the emptiness that was waiting for us. I tried to talk to David about this feeling I had that we were fading into the background of our own lives. He would look up from his screen, his kind eyes confused behind his glasses, and say, "It's just a new phase, Margaret. We'll adjust. We always do." He didn't understand that I didn't want to adjust to the quiet. I wanted to break it. That's when I started volunteering at the local art museum. It was something to fill the hours, to feel connected to something beautiful and larger than myself. And that's where I met Leo. He was a new donor, charming and full of life. Where David was solid earth, Leo was a spark. He had a laugh that could fill a room and a way of telling a story that made you feel like you were right there with him. He noticed things. He noticed the specific shade of blue I wore one day. He remembered an offhand comment I'd made about a preference for classical sculpture over modern art. He made me feel interesting. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. It started innocently enough. Emails about museum events turned into longer conversations. Then it was coffee, then lunch. I told myself it was just friendship, a intellectual connection. I was lying to myself, and I knew it. But the lie was so much more appealing than my reality. The first time his hand brushed against mine, a jolt went through me, a reminder of a part of myself I thought had gone dormant forever. The guilt was immediate and sharp, a cold knife in my stomach every time I came home to David, who would ask me how my committee meeting went. But the guilt was also addictive. It was proof that I was still capable of feeling something strong. I became a meticulous liar. I crafted alibis with the focus of a novelist. I had a whole roster of fictional friends, Susan, Linda, Carol, who were always having crises or celebrations that required my presence. I opened a separate email account. I was careful with my phone. David, trusting and straightforward, never suspected a thing. His unwavering faith in me should have been my salvation, but instead it felt like a chain. His simple, "I love you," before he went to street began to feel like an accusation. The affair with Leo lasted for 6 months. They were 6 months of living in a heightened state. Every sense alert, every emotion amplified.
I was living two lives, and the effort was exhausting, but I was addicted to the secret thrill of it. I started to become resentful of David's small habits, the way he chewed his food, his predictable shows he watched, his contentment with our mundane life. I used that resentment to justify my actions. Look what he's made me do, I would think, ignoring the fact that he had made me do nothing. I had chosen this path myself. I grew careless. I started wearing the perfume Leo said he liked. I was shorter with David, more critical. I was trying to create a conflict, I think, to make his real world failings match the narrative I was building in my head to excuse my own behavior. One evening, I came home late after an afternoon with Leo. The house was dark except for the light in David's study. That was unusual. He was always in the living room by that time. I called out, "Honey, I'm home," trying to sound normal, but my voice was a little too high, a little too bright. There was no answer. I walked back to his study. The door was open. He was sitting at his desk, not working, not reading. He was just sitting, staring at a framed photograph on his desk. It was a picture of the three of us from Chloe's high school graduation just a few months ago. We were all smiling. Perfect, happy family. He didn't look up when I stepped into the doorway. "David, is everything okay?" He slowly turned his head. The look on his face stopped me cold. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was a complete and utter absence of emotion. His eyes, which had always held a gentle warmth for me, were flat and cold, like two stones at the bottom of a river. He looked at me for a long moment, and I felt a chill that started in my spine and spread out to my fingertips. I was sure he knew. He had to know. "Long day," he said finally, his voice eerily calm. "How was your meeting?" My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. It was it was fine, long, the usual budget discussions. I was babbling. He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. "Good. I'm glad it was productive." Then he turned back to the photograph.
Effectively dismissing me. I stood there for another moment, frozen, waiting for the other shoe to drop, but it didn't. I went to the kitchen, my hands trembling as I poured a glass of water. I expected him to follow me, to demand the truth, but he didn't. He stayed in his study until long after I had gone to bed. The next day and the days that followed were perfectly normal. He made coffee, he went to work, he asked me about my plans. But the warmth was gone. The easy companionship we had shared for 2 decades had vanished, replaced by a polite, distant civility. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my guilt was manufacturing a problem where there wasn't one. He was just stressed about work or worried about Chloe leaving. I clung to these explanations because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. I had no idea that the man I had underestimated for 20 years had already begun the quiet, meticulous work of dismantling my life. The storm wasn't coming with thunder and lightning. It was building in the silence, and I was too busy listening to the echo of my own lies to hear it. The silence that followed that night in his study was the most unnerving sound I have ever heard. It wasn't just an absence of noise, it was a presence, a heavy, living thing that filled the rooms of our house. For 2 months, I lived inside that silence, waiting for it to break. I expected shouting, tears, accusations, the dramatic explosion that would, in a terrible way, validate the intensity of my secret life. But David gave me nothing. He was pleasant. He was cordial. He asked about my day and listened to my fabricated answers with a polite, detached interest that was far worse than any interrogation. It was during this time that Leo started talking about the future. His company was opening a new West Coast office, and he was being asked to head it up. "Come with me, Maggie," he'd say, his voice full of that exciting, reckless energy that had first drawn me in. "We can start over, so you'll see a new life where we don't have to hide."
The idea was a siren's call. It was the perfect escape hatch from the suffocating quiet of my marriage, a chance to trade this beige existence for one in full, glorious color. I started to fantasize about it in earnest. I would live in a sun-drenched apartment with a view of the ocean. I would be Maggie forever, vibrant and desired, not Margaret, the fading wife in a silent house. I began the mental process of leaving. I thought about how I would tell Chloe, crafting the words to make me sound not like a villain, but a woman bravely pursuing happiness. I looked at real estate listings in San Francisco, imagining a life so different from my own, it felt like a dream. In my mind, I was already packing my bags, and in doing so, I became even more detached from the life I was still technically living. David noticed, of course. How could he not? But he said nothing. Instead, he began to change. It was a metamorphosis so gradual I almost missed it at first, but so profound it eventually became impossible to ignore. The man who had worn the same style of khakis and polo shirts for a decade suddenly started coming home in well-tailored trousers and crisp, modern button-downs. He started going to the gym, not with the grudging obligation of a middle-aged man, but with a focused determination. He lost weight, his shoulders seemed to broaden, and a new confidence settled in his posture. Then he started working later. He mentioned he was mentoring a new junior partner at his firm, a woman named Sarah. He spoke about her with a spark of intellectual admiration I hadn't heard him use in years. "She's sharp," he'd say over dinner, his eyes actually animated. "She has a completely different way of looking at structural problems. It's refreshing." A cold, sharp sliver of jealousy lodged itself beneath my ribs. For 20 years, I had been the sole focus of his world, a fact that I had taken for granted and had even in my darkest moments resented. Now that focus had shifted. His phone, which had always been a utilitarian device for work calls and texting me about groceries, was now a constant companion. He'd smile at it, sometimes, a small, private smile before typing a quick reply. The green-eyed monster I had never known I housed began to gnaw at me. How dare he? How dare he become interesting now? How dare he find intellectual stimulation, and I suspected admiration, from another woman? I started doing the very things I had once condemned in Paranoid Wives. I'd casually walk past his study when his phone was charging, trying to catch a glimpse of the screen. I checked the caller ID on the home phone. I even, gosh, the shame of it, once pretended to be looking for a pen and went through the pockets of the jacket he had left on a chair. I found nothing. No lipstick-stained receipts, no incriminating notes, just a dry cleaning slip and some loose change. The lack of evidence didn't calm me. It made me more frantic. His life had developed a secret compartment, and I was locked out. The first real crack in my fantasy world with Leo appeared on the Friday. We had plans to meet at our usual hotel. I was already feeling on edge, the jealousy over Sarah having poisoned my mood all day. Then a text from Leo came through just an hour before we were to meet. "Sorry, miss your work. Emergency. Can't make it. Rain check." Disappointment curdled into familiar anxiety. That night, restless and suspicious, I scrolled through Instagram. A post from one of Leo's colleagues, a group photo from a trendy rooftop bar timestamped for that very evening. And there he was in the center, his arm draped easily around the shoulders of a stunning young woman from his office. He was laughing, his face illuminated by the camera flash and her presence. He looked the way he always did with me, happy, confident, completely in his element. The bottom dropped out of my stomach. The next day I confronted him, my voice shaking with a fury that was mostly fear. He was dismissive, almost bored. "It was a last-minute client drinks thing, Maggie. She's on the project team. You're being paranoid." Then he delivered the blow, perfectly aimed. "You, of all people, should know how things can look." The words hung in the air between us, toxic and true. The man for whom I was ready to obliterate my family was, I realized with sickening clarity, exactly like me. Our grand romance was just another secret, another convenience. The vibrant future in San Francisco suddenly looked like a lonely apartment where I would wait for a man who thought so little of me. The thrill was gone, replaced by a hollow, chilling dread. I had been so focused on my own escape, I had failed to see how easily he could escape too. To notice that the ground beneath my feet had already been pulled away. David wasn't just waiting for me to leave. He was already gone.
The confrontation with Leo shattered the beautiful illusion I'd been clinging to. The colors of my fantasy world drained away, leaving everything in shades of gray. I ended it with him over a brief, painful phone call. His response was more of relief than regret, which only confirmed what I already knew. I was left alone with the wreckage of my own making and the silent, changing man who was my husband. For a few weeks, I floated through the house in a state of paralyzed guilt. I thought about confessing everything to David, throwing myself on his mercy. But the strange new distance between us felt impenetrable. He was never unkind, but the familiar ease was gone, replaced by the polite demeanor one might use with a stranger on a train. My confession felt like it would be an imposition on his time. So, I stayed quiet, trying to be the perfect wife, overcompensating with his favorite meals and eager questions about his day. He accepted it all with that same infuriating calm. The end began, as these things often do, with a perfectly ordinary event. Chloe was coming home for her first fall break. I was frantic with preparation, wanting everything to be perfect, a desperate attempt to reclaim the happy family we once were. The day she was due to arrive, David suggested we have a proper family meeting after dinner. My heart leapt with a fragile hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe he was going to acknowledge the strain and we would finally talk, truly talk, and begin to fix things. Dinner was a cheerful affair filled with Chloe's stories about college life. David was engaged and funny, the most animated I'd seen him in months. He felt like my David again. But when the plates were cleared and he poured himself a glass of water, his demeanor shifted back into that unnerving calm. He folded his hands on the table. "Chloe, your mother and I have something we need to discuss with you," he began, his voice even and clear. My breath caught. This was it. I prepared myself for the painful, necessary truth. He continued, looking directly at our daughter. "As you know, the two of us have been growing apart for some time now." His words were careful, chosen with an engineer's precision. "We've tried to work through it, but we've decided that the healthiest thing for our family is to formally separate." I stared at him, my mouth agape. "We've decided?" We had decided nothing. I had been clinging to the wreckage, hoping for a lifeline. Chloe looked between us, her face a mask of confusion and hurt. "What? When did this happen? Why didn't you tell me?" David gave a sad, gentle smile. "We didn't want to worry you while you were settling in, sweetheart. These things are complicated, but the decision is made." He then slid a thick manila envelope across the table to me. "Margaret, these are the preliminary divorce papers. My lawyer has already gone over them. I think you'll find the terms are more than fair." The world seemed to slow down. This wasn't a discussion. It was an announcement, a fait accompli. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. The first page was the standard legal language, but as I flipped through, my blood ran cold. He had attached a meticulously compiled file of financial records. There were printouts of hotel receipts, credit card statements showing dinners for two, even a log of my text message history with Leo, the dates and times highlighted. He knew everything. He had known for months. "How?" I whispered, my voice strangled. "That's not important," he said, his gaze steady. "What's important are the terms. You'll see I'm keeping the house and my retirement funds. You are being awarded a one-time lump sum alimony payment.
It's a significant amount, enough for you to get a fresh start. I scanned the number. It was generous, shockingly so. But then my eyes caught the clause beside it. In exchange for the aforementioned sum, the recipient, Margaret Ann Evans, agrees to forfeit all future claims to the couple's shared assets, including, but not limited to, the husband's equity in his firm and any future proceeds from the patent currently pending for the structural integrity and design software, SIDS. I looked up at him, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place with a horrifying clarity. The late nights, the new junior partner, Sarah, the patent. He hadn't been having an affair. He had been building a firewall. He had used my distraction, my absence, to pour all his energy into a project so valuable that he had legally walled it off from me before I even knew it existed. My affair had given him the time, the motivation, and the perfect moral high ground to surgically remove me from his financial future without looking like the bad guy. He had made me the villain in the story, and he was the wronged husband being magnanimous. He had taken my betrayal, and with the quiet, methodical patience that had always defined him, he had used it to build himself a better life, one I was no longer a part of. The patent? I stammered. You did this. I worked very hard. Yes, he said, his voice devoid of triumph, which made it all the more devastating. This separation is the best path forward for everyone. It allows us both to move on with our lives cleanly. He looked at Chloe, his expression softening with genuine pain. This is the hardest part, honey. None of this is your fault. Your mother and I both love you very much. And that was it. He had orchestrated it all. He had let me continue in my affair, not because he was a cuckold, but because it was the ultimate evidence for his case. He had become a better, more successful version of himself, making my claims of a stale marriage look pathetic. He had waited until the most impactful moment in front of our daughter to present his fait accompli, ensuring I was too stunned and shamed to fight back. I signed the papers a week later. What choice did I have? To drag it through court and have every sordid detail of my affair laid bare to fight a man who had outmaneuvered me at every turn? He had given me a generous enough payout to silence my conscience and any potential criticism from friends and family. He got to play the gracious, wounded party, and I got to be the tragic, midlife crisis cliché who walked away from a good man. The last time I saw him, he was helping me load a single suitcase into a taxi. The house, our home, was his. The life we built was his. He stood on the sidewalk, not with hatred, but with a profound, unshakable peace. I hope you find what you're looking for, Margaret. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he wasn't just talking about the future. He was talking about the past. He had found what he was looking for. Not revenge in the fiery, dramatic sense, but a cold, permanent, and utterly complete victory. He had taken my betrayal, and with the quiet, methodical patience that had always defined him, he had used it to build himself a better life, one I was no longer a part of. And as the taxi pulled away, I realized the cruelest cut of all. The greatest revenge was not in making me suffer, but in showing me in exquisite, undeniable detail exactly what I had thrown away.